Good morning and welcome to our conversation for today, what's next with blended learning here in Nebraska. And so really excited to be joined today by Jason Everett at ESU 10, Eileen Heller at ESU 3, and we are going to have an opportunity today to be talking a little bit about generative AI in education and ChatGPT and all those things. And so if that is of interest to you, that's where today's conversation is going, and really getting a chance to reflect on some learning too from our statewide tech conference, which was NEDA, and that took place not too long ago. And so I want to thank Jason and Eileen for joining us today. And maybe to start off our conversation, it would be helpful for folks that aren't necessarily familiar with artificial intelligence versus generative artificial intelligence, and what is it about this ChatGPT thing that has sort of moved that conversation forward. So I think that might be a nice place for us to start. And who would like to maybe help with the distinction of those to start today's conversation?
Yeah, my understanding of that is that artificial intelligence, just the basic side of that, is very specific towards a particular application. And so generative artificial intelligence is more broad, and it covers more of what we would consider thinking versus, like, for example, just helpful. Like, for example, we can see AI in a search. When you do a Google search, it will help you fill that search out with giving you some suggestions. That would be just AI, where generative AI is actually having a conversation with another machine. So that's kind of the basics of how I understand that.
Yeah, and I'll just back up a little bit and share with everyone that the three of us on here went through an ISTE course last year on artificial intelligence. And that was really eye-opening and good time to just get like this baseline literacy of what it is for myself. And I'm still learning so much. And now ChatGPT has exploded everywhere. And my understanding is I pay attention to that word generative as in generate. And so the generative AI is going to generate something for you. It's going to generate text back for you if you want to have a speech written for you or an essay, or it's going to generate a video using some of the artificial intelligence, or it's going to generate images for you, maybe bringing together 2 or 3 different images in some manner, so that generative generates some sort of product for you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where that, well, I'll just throw it up there. That GPT is generative, right? So that's where the G in that part comes from. Pre-trained, which means that it comes from a pre-existing set of
Data
information,
set.
but it's trained to synthesize. Maybe is a thing I would add to. I love what Jason and Eileen have shared here, and so that's somewhat how I think about it. Is instead of looking at 10 different Google. I type something to Google and give me 10 different places to look for the answer. It instead will go through and bring those and let bubble up, I guess, the one that, or the idea that seems most prominent. And crazy how fast this stuff is evolving at the same time too. And so let's focus on ChatGPT again as being one of these. There are a number of different ways in which this technology is manifesting itself in the things we're able to do and create and learn from. But what do we know about ChatGPT?
Well, I'll share just something recently, because I was kind of trying to figure out too, how did this explode so fast? And how did it get so many users so fast? And a podcast that I listened to recently talked about how this has been something that's been around for a while, like the ability of doing this. But the reason why ChatGPT seemed to explode was a couple reasons. In the past, it might be able to produce an essay that they said would maybe get a C, D range if somebody went to grade it. But in the recent capabilities of it with ChatGPT, is it was able to get an essay written as well as a grade that might get a B. So it had improved, is one of the things. And then the other thing was ChatGPT provided an interface that was very simple. And that interface was so simple that anybody of any age could go in there, type in something, get something produced for them. If they learned how to do the prompts a little bit more succinctly or more specifically, or how to reiterate the prompt, it produced even better results for them. So I think that was what the kind of explanation was, is why this took off compared to other ones where it might have been a little clunkier, maybe not producing quite what people wanted, or it was hard, like you had to sign up for it and do a lot of different things. And ChatGPT, you do have to sign up for it, but then it saves everything that you've been working on and you can go back and reiterate.
Yeah, I'll add to that. The latest versions have even gone beyond and passed the bar exam, the SATs, ACTs, all of those things, and not just passed them, but passed them with flying colors. And so the intelligence there is seemingly pulling from so many data sets now that there's just, and like you said, Andrew, the way it's synthesizing that is just able to do a lot better job. And so I think that's partly why it's getting so popular. And then the other thing I think is just the range of topics that you can do. You can have it code for you. You can have it write a paper. You can have it give you suggestions for a presentation. You can have it enhance your lesson plans. I mean, there's so many different topics that you can choose to use from. It's literally mind-blowing. If you have a topic that you want more information on, it will synthesize its data set and give it to you. And the other cool part about that is that you have a threaded conversation with it. So once you ask it something, you don't have to reiterate what you asked. You just continue the conversation. And so I think that's super powerful in terms of letting it speak back to you or give you information, as opposed to just a Google search, which we're used to. We're used to just having it give us websites and things like that. So this is a lot more interactive.
Yeah, I love that. It's conversational, and it almost is challenging to break away from the I'm entering this into Google mindset when you start to request it to use what it's capable of doing to produce whatever answers or information or synthesis of it, like obviously across multiple sources. So and just to give maybe some context with this, because I'm with you, we're talking about different things. One of them that I asked was, hey, I'd love to have 5 recipes for dinner tonight. And so what would you recommend? And I brought these up. And then I follow an influencer on Instagram named Max Lugavere, who recently wrote a cookbook. And so then I encouraged or asked ChatGPT to go and look into Max Lugavere and some of the things that he's released with regards to blogs, etc. And then give me 5 different suggestions that would align to those, like the influence, right, that he has in some of the things. And it did. And the recipes there, from what I understand of that cookbook that Max Lugavere has released, it seemed to be pretty on brand. So that is not something Google can presently do.
I'll take Andrew. Just last night, my 2 sons are getting ready for April Fool's Day. And one has all his pranks planned, ready to go for Saturday. And so the other one, I was like, you better step it up. And he's like, I don't know what to do. I was like, let's go ask ChatGPT. And what surprised me, but delights me, is ChatGPT said it is not appropriate to cause any harm to somebody by doing pranks. However, here's a list of some harmless things that you can do to your brother. And then it pulled out, like, freeze his cereal and milk in the morning so that when he goes to breakfast, it's frozen, some things like that. Even as far as suggesting that he goes into the bedroom and turns things upside down inside his bedroom. However, make sure it's not something that's going to be an obstacle that he would trip over in the dark. So I was a little surprised by how they've baked in some of those safety guards. And I know that it's not perfect, but I was a little surprised that popped up when we asked for a list of 3 pranks that would go well for one brother to play on the other brother.
That is interesting, because in listening to podcasts a few months back, it seems like some of those guardrails were not up. And so some of the people who got to sort of beta test it and report out afterwards, they shortly thereafter reported that asking it about itself, and sort of trying to lead it into places of mischief, we'll just say, without getting the details of that particular episode. Yeah, it found ways to kind of keep people from asking it to do things with ill intent.
And the flip side of that, just being able to ask it things that are super helpful. Just yesterday, we had some conversations about our leadership network here at ESU 10, and I'm thinking of trying different ways of our leaders spend so much time doing, I'll say, menial type things. What are the things that it can help you save time with? And so little things, I asked it to write a disciplinary letter to the parents of Jason. And so it filled out, and it within 15 seconds, it had a very nice template that I could use and modify and send off, rather than spending 15 minutes trying to do that myself and worry about it. And so there's so many different things that I think it can be a huge time saver for.
And Jason, that's where I'm noticing is that it's taking it from a group or an individual starting at zero, a blank canvas, and getting them to about 70% within mere seconds. And so I was showing some colleagues how I've been using it. And then one of the colleagues said, what about our district that's hiring a new superintendent? Could it write for the board the goals that it would want for that new superintendent, or how they would evaluate it? And so I said, let's ask it. And it's synthesizing, like Andrew said, synthesizing all of the information that's out there around that topic for her. And she's like, I could have just Googled that. And I said, you could. However, it pulled all that information into a synthesized starting point that you could bring back to the team and go through which of these pieces do we like, which pieces do we want to take out, and what do we want to add in. So it would take a whole group that would sit and brainstorm for probably several hours to at least 70%, and then they can take it up to that 100.
Yeah, and I think that kind of almost gets to the place too where you start to think about what are some of the implications, right? So if this technology is going to exist and it's going to enhance from, I think as we were talking about before, in November, it came out, ChatGPT 3, where we're talking about technology that I think was in the bottom 10 percentile on those assessments you're talking about, Jason. And then 6 months later in March, now is scoring the 90th percentile. Where is that going to be moving forward? And how should we start to think about how it can accompany the work that we're doing? And Eileen, I think that's great to say, yeah, how does this expedite that initial process and get me to a place where we can really start to then refine from the information that now we don't have to invest that time in to get to 70%.
And that's where I see going forward, not just those textual prompts, but how that works with visuals as well, and even audio, how to transform. I know in education right now, copyright is a big issue. And so I want to find a picture that has certain elements in it. Not only is that difficult just to go out and find, but then to find something that is royalty free is super hard. And if I can just put that into a search and it develops something for me that is not of copyright, then those are huge advantages, I think, to teachers and students as they're developing projects and really rethinking their learning process.
Ooh, can I pivot and share something then? Because I did something very similar to this. I learned about, because again, we were talking about ChatGPT here up to this point. And so just to kind of make sure that we're making a clear distinction that there are other sites, programs, places where you can do some of this work. And so Deep Dream Generator is one of those that does the image piece that you're talking about too. And so I'm going to share this real quick and I was actually sharing this conversation with Eileen yesterday, and she encouraged me. So here's the site. And what's kind of fun is that when you're on here, it tells you what someone entered in: an intricate landscape of daisies and dandelions and Queen Anne's lace. And I'm sure there's more to it than that. And it's just it's pretty incredible, the things that it's just coming up with. Again, it didn't go out and Google search, find this. It said, create this. And so this is the first time, that this is been put together, right? And so I asked, from an educational standpoint here, right? Like, okay, can I get a character from a book? So I said Montag from Fahrenheit 451 to be placed in Times Square, and to bring that not in a way that looks like an animation like this, but something that is actually like looks human. And it did that. And then if you'll note, I believe this little thing in the corner here is the robotic dog from Fahrenheit, which is crazy to me that it just generated that at that request, right? That it was so specific. It even had the patches on the sleeves of the firemen, for those that are familiar with Fahrenheit, clearly showing my English nerdiness in this moment. But yeah, I mean, so what for the student who would like to create some sort of visual to accompany their understanding of a particular text, or to have as some visual cues, and now you don't have to worry about that copyright piece. Love that.
So Andrew, can I ask, is that, because I'm not familiar with the text, was that the location? Did they go to Times Square? Was that at all a part of it? Okay. You
Right.
just selected that.
Yeah, so I just placed them in New York City because I was curious to see if it would be able to do so.
Yeah. But it would be a unique thing for when students are trying to identify the main elements of the story and the setting and the characters and the theme of the story, that they do oftentimes in chapter books, they have to visualize that themselves. But if they could use Deep Dream Generator and actually put it, maybe it is they took place in the rainforest, or they took place, somewhere specific, and that they could generate that. And that would express some of the learning to the teacher, that they understood some of those elements of the story, or they could add it into the project and add some more visual element to it. I think that has some opportunities for students to create with some of that AI.
Absolutely. And I want to honor some of our comments too that are coming in here live, because I love that this gives us a format to have conversations like this. And so love some of the new tools. Text to image is pretty awesome. I would agree. Dorian, thanks for sharing. I know that Canva training last week, they released several new tools that use AI to create image-based and that is a really I wonder what the future of graphic design, for example, looks like with a tool like this. And so if we start to think about how we support learners in those kind of spaces, something that also came up that's worth doubling back to here, and I want to thank Jody for asking this, is that, there's clearly an opportunity for bias here with some of these things that get kicked back. And I'll share later the podcast with who was the person who was our coach, Helen Crompton, for our AI training, talked about that it's not the technology that's biased, it's the information being input, which is created by humans. And so I think that's a good foundational place to build from. But it is, when I think about the sensationalized headlines that become the most popular, that are replicated and copied, and different subsequent articles created off of an initial test result. All of those are trying to capture people's attention by sort of using that elevated loaded language, and it starts to make you wonder what that would look like over time. And I think there's a lot of other factors that play into that. But what thoughts have you both had regarding some of that bias, and maybe how we need to be thoughtful in how we interact with some of that information as a result?
Oh, I definitely agree with you that there's the bias out there, and it's based on the data set that's available to the machine that's using that information. And so the other thing that I think is going to be a challenge, but I think a good challenge going forward, is when we start thinking about different images. If I want to place some political type things inside of an image, and rearrange it to what I want to be my bias, that's going to be real easy to do. And so just being cognizant that not everything that you see or hear in either graphics or audio or video is necessarily true. So I think we're going to have, as educators, probably a bigger challenge going forward, just discerning those types of things. And to me, I find that encouraging, because it's one of those things where our sources can't just be one source. And so how did they get to this point? How is this true? And so having some of those skills to be able to discern that, I think, is going to be hugely important going forward.
Yeah, and I'll build on that. What Jason talked about is that education of our students and ourselves. The podcast I listened to recently, it's Brene Brown's podcast, but she was interviewing two people that wrote the book, The Digital Mindset. And and I haven't read the book yet, but the podcast was very enlightening to me because they talked about that baseline literacy that everybody needs. And they compared it to a foreign language. And if you went to a country and you did not know that language or did not know that language well, you can't participate. You can't participate and understand in the conversation, and you can't participate and understand what's right or wrong. And so what she compared that to is the literacy around artificial intelligence or just digital literacy in general is important because you have a role. And she talked about it being a dual role. There's the role as you, the consumer, and then the role of the people that are building this. And it's important that both have the literacy, a baseline literacy around it, because if you don't, then you can't participate in it. And when I think about our younger students in K-12, it is a place where we need to build at least that baseline literacy around it. It's some places I've seen it naturally. Common Sense Education has some pre-made lessons, and in it, it's showing the enhancements and trying to figure out which one's the fake or which one's been filtered. And then it will reveal, what did Britney Spears look like before she was filtered? What did, oh gosh, I can never think, the football guy, like his biceps are huge in this picture. And then you see it unfiltered. Tom Brady. That's who it was. You can see where my pop culture lies. So when I'm thinking about those, so Common Sense Education has had that in for several years as one way to show students. The dayofai.org, Day of AI, they have pre-made lessons, and it's gives students an understanding of what is artificial intelligence, and it is from K down to 12. So they start at real young. It gives the teachers slide decks to go along with it. It gives them the lesson plan to go along with it. And I think we need to find space somewhere in that K-12 education that this comes up for students so that they have that literacy, that baseline literacy, so that when they are faced with something, they do pause and consider it. It just happened to me last week when there was the news circulating about a possible arrest of Trump. And then I saw on Twitter all the pictures. I was like, oh my gosh, he was arrested. Well, then I had to pause and think about it and check a couple more sources. It was fake generated images. And I would have fallen for it, but I was like, what? I haven't heard this on any other news source. And so I think about our students. It's going to be so imperative that we give them some sort of understanding of how this works, so that they can take the time to pause and consider, is this real? Do I need to check some other sources before you get too excited about it?
Ooh, and that's that's a challenge, right? So often today we accept the first thing Google shares with us, right? And so to think that you might not even be able to trust your eyes and ears is going to bring digital citizenship even further into the forefront as a necessary. It already is, but I mean, and certainly with those things working against it, because one of the things, even in anticipating releasing a podcast on it, I learned that there are places where you can go and have your voice recorded, and then it will, after enough samples, be able to create anything. Where it sounds like you were the one that did that. Now, some of that stuff's still in beta because I did lean into that and try to find it. But I see that it exists. It just isn't quite ready for everybody just yet. But yeah, to think that you might be able to hear a soundbite that sounds exactly like that individual, but was never something that they ever uttered, or when this really gets to a place where that happens in a video space too, it's going to be tough to parcel out what's authentic from what's not. And speaking of authenticity, Craig Hicks has a question too about, will there be copyright issues by submitting ChatGPT content as your own, especially if those folks are authoring it and making a profit off of it, which I've not I've heard that question posed, but I've not necessarily heard much in response to that, other than I do know of 3 individuals who wrote a book and said that they used about 70% of that content came from ChatGPT.
I know ChatGPT itself, their licensing is that once it's generated, you own it. And so you can do whatever you want with it. You can sell it, any of that. So I don't know if that's where it's headed, but that's currently where ChatGPT stands.
In my own ethical comfort, personally, I have been, when I use it for work, so I generated a list of inquiry questions an instructional coach might ask a teacher going through adapting to change using the concerns-based adoption model stages. And so when I constructed the document, I constructed it and cited at the bottom the source where the concerns-based adoption model came from. And then I said, then cited that the questions were generated from ChatGPT based off of Eileen Heller's inquiry for it. So that's my own personal ethical way of, and then I share it in my session. This is where I went in ChatGPT. This is what I asked it. Here's the questions it generated. I reiterated some of these, and then I encourage you to reiterate based off of your context. So I don't know the right way, but that would be the way that I would teach students also.
Yeah, and I wonder from the creator's standpoint, if my information is posted somewhere and then ChatGPT points to that. Now it's going to do a synthesis again, right? So I'm not sure that it's pulling exclusively from any one place, right? But if that is predominantly coming from one source, as that creator, if I feel okay with giving my licensure to that, like, right, my rights to that information up to somebody else because it was filtered through, I don't know. I think these are great questions to ponder. Half hour goes really fast. We actually didn't even get into our segment, and so I'll share Dorian's story here too with fake news and something that we need to consider as well. And it was clunky, she said, but it can. I think it's only obviously going to get better and better over time. But yeah, a lot to talk about in half an hour on this topic. We usually get to a segment where we have the opportunity to explore some recent tech tips and tools. And so if there is anything kind of that we could point to briefly, an elevator pitch, maybe 30 seconds. Jason, Eileen, is there something that you'd like to share with others that they should look into further?
I think the easiest way to get into this, if you're interested, either ChatGPT or I love Canva. It's just a fun resource to be able to do, and it's free for educators. And so they're kind of on what I would consider a cutting edge of not only graphic design, but the AI model and being able to pull some of that. So Canva.
And I think mine would be the one that I referred to earlier, dayofai.org. It provides lessons for teachers. And if you don't want to do the lessons with your students, but you're curious yourself, it's great to go through even the educator guide that they provide or the slide deck, because there's baked into it a lot of links to these different programs such as the deep fake generator or the deep whatever generator that you shared. Yeah, the Dream Generator. So there's a lot of those built into theirs. It does ask you to register, and then it sends you the password so that you can access all of those Google documents. And the Day of AI is on May 18th, just to bring exposure to it. But you can access these lessons, do those lessons at any time that you want, and just do them yourself, like read through, check out some of the links. And it's like teaching yourself. And then you can decide where in your space and education it belongs.
That's super cool. I probably should share something that is AI infused, and I'm not sure to what degree this is. My learning, and I just shared it in the comments, was about Nountown, a VR language learning piece, which I actually picked up from Jamie Donnelly. So in there, you can put on this VR headset, and you have a microphone as well, and you enter into a space that is entirely in grayscale. And as you pick items up, the little animation comes in and tells you how to say it, and you practice saying that out loud, and it turns the color, and then you set it back down, and you basically, like, the world comes alive around you as you interact with it in different challenges. And she was really impressed with that and advocated for it. And that gives me my own segue probably to point people to where you can learn more from this conversation. And so we've referenced several times today Dr. Helen Crompton, and so we're really grateful to yesterday release on the Good Life EDU podcast, a conversation with her about ChatGPT and the future of generative AI, where we explore some of the things we talked about today. She has been in that space for over a decade and just really brings a wealth of knowledge. And so that was great. It is not released yet, but Jamie Donnelly will be sharing on an upcoming episode that'll be out before the end of this week on AR, VR, and the role generative AI is playing in enhancing those learning experiences. And she does a 31 days of AR, VR commitment every March, where she releases a new blog every day for 31 days. And so that podcast will be one of those days. And we cover several of the days in that one conversation. And then to further support folks, because we love trying to just promote things and be helpful in that space, I would point folks to check out Matt Miller's AI for Educators book, which was recently released. And so he's the author of Ditch That Textbook for people that are not familiar with Matt. He's awesome and really leaned into that space quickly and unofficially. But yesterday he said in an email he'd be cool joining us for a podcast about the book and a little bit deeper dive on what this looks like in supporting teachers. I would hope that we get to cover like in the short term, right? Like how do we use this technology in the next few years as it continues to evolve to support education and learning and helping students like onboard to this ahead of their future where this is going to be prevalent. So I got to say thanks to Jason, thanks to Eileen, thanks to everybody who joined us online and left those comments. It's really great to connect with folks in this space and to capture this conversation. We encourage you to join us each and every week that we do this, or every last Tuesday of the month, I should say, which our next one will be on April 25th. At 9:30 a.m. Central. And we'll be back here to continue this conversation about what we're learning with regards to blended learning and technology. And so we hope to see all of you then. Thanks, everybody.